Okay, thank you very much everyone, and welcome to the launch of our campaign, Too Precious to Lose. The Australian environment is under pressure as never before. When we think about what we love about our country, and we describe that to friends and people we meet as we travel, we always come back to talking about our sense of place in Australia, and at the heart of that sense of place is the natural environment. We talk about the wonderful Great Barrier Reef. We talk about the Tarkine, the largest temperate rainforest still intact in the Southern Hemisphere. We talk about the Coorong. We talk about the Kimberley. Right around the country, we are talking about the things that we love and the creatures that habitat supports. And I think a lot of Australians were really distressed to discover that the koala is now on the list of vulnerable species. Victoria had a second chance with the leadbeater possum, which was thought to be extinct for such a long time, then was rediscovered. But now, under pressure because of climate change and the extreme bushfires, but particularly from logging, we are losing the habitat of the leadbeater possum. What we are finding is that the resource extraction industry, whether it's the mining industry, the logging industry, oil and gas, is actually being allowed to liquidate our natural environment, liquidate habitats, and drive more and more plant and animal species towards extinction. And what we're finding is that the federal government is actually facilitating that. We're about to go back to pre-1970s in Australia when it comes to the issue of protecting our environment. What we're seeing is the state and federal governments getting together to basically say, mining and extraction and logging companies, we want to facilitate you extracting whatever you want as fast as you can to make as fast a dollar as you can at the expense of our environment. We really need to take a stand across the country. And that's what the Australian Greens are doing with this campaign, saying to Australians right around the country, join us in protecting the things we love about our country, and don't allow the federal government, supported by Tony Abbott, to hand over the protection of our precious places to the states. After all, if it had been up to the Tasmanian government, the Franklin Dam would have been built. If it was up to the Queensland government of the time, there would have been oil rigs right through the Great Barrier Reef. We can't allow it to happen again. Larissa is going to talk about exactly what is being proposed and why we need the community to join us in saving our places that are too precious to lose.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Christine. Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to start with a quote from a fiery young Labor MP in 1999 when our environment laws were being passed. In this legislation, they've enabled the states and the Commonwealth to now go through a process where, through a bilateral agreement, in future the Commonwealth could say to Victoria and states with track records of environmental vandalism like Victoria, here, you have the responsibility for the Ramsar wetlands, here, you have the responsibility for the environmental impacts of a toxic dump, and just let it happen. Now, the MP that was protesting against that disastrous event of the Commonwealth being able to hand over powers to the states was Julia Gillard. So in 1999, she thought the environment was too important to hand to the states. In April this year, she thought half of the environment was too important to hand to the states. After a COAG meeting, she said the Commonwealth would keep World Heritage and nuclear actions in Commonwealth waters. But I discovered on Tuesday in Senate estimates that actually the Prime Minister doesn't think any part of the environment is too important to hand over to the states. So this COAG agreement that's been negotiated by Labor and back to the hilt by Tony Abbott has the Commonwealth Department currently doing the preparation to hand over all of the Commonwealth's environmental responsibilities to state governments. That's all of our World Heritage areas, all of our nationally threatened species, all of our internationally significant wetlands, all of our migratory species, even nuclear actions, and all by March next year. So this will have Colin Barnett, Campbell Newman, in charge of the environmental impacts of digging up uranium, getting it to port. And of course all of that will now happen because Julia Gillard's happy to facilitate that being shipped offshore to India. Now, in a speech in August to the Press Club, one of John Howard's Environment Ministers, Robert Hill, said he thought that this was going too far. He said, and I quote, "I gather that COAG is now interested in trading that responsibility off, and I think that's a mistake. I think that's disappointing. You know, I hope they come back to a subsequent COAG meeting and decide to maintain that proper balance of responsibility between the Commonwealth and the states." Now, this serves to illustrate that our environment is under attack like never before. We're continuing to lose precious habitat, our biodiversity continues to fall, and tragically the threatened species list has tripled in the last 20 years. Our incredible Great Barrier Reef in my home state of Queensland is slowly being turned into a highway for coal and gas exports. And instead of becoming a World Heritage Area, the wonderful Tarkine forests of Tasmania have now got 10 new mines planned. And of course, being the state emblem of Victoria isn't going to save the leadbeater's possum from being logged to extinction, even though there's only 1,000 now left in the wild. Clearly, our national environmental laws are failing us. And instead of making them stronger, we've got Labor ganging up with Tony Abbott's coalition to make them weaker and palm their powers off to state governments. Now, Christine's already talked about the risks of when environmental protections are left to the state governments. As Christine said, we would have seen oil rigs in the Great Barrier Reef. The Franklin would have been dammed. We would see cattle trampling that fragile alpine national park in Victoria. And even now, Colin Barnard is planning to turn James Price Point, that beautiful fragile area, into a massive gas hub. Campbell Newman, of course, has slashed funding for environment programs, solar energy, and wants to wind back protection for our wild rivers and open up the Cape to mining. Barry O'Farrell is opening up national parks in New South Wales to shooting. You'll see more details of what the states have planned in one of the packs there at the back of the room. It all serves to illustrate we simply cannot trust the environment to state governments. Now, the Greens are launching this campaign today so that we can come together with the community to fight for those places, those species, those icons that we hold so dear and that make us who we are. The ALP and the Coalition don't think that those places and wildlife are precious to all Australians, and they're not going to step up to big business and to miners. They're going to let them have everything they want in the pursuit of short-term profits. I think it's really tragic that the ALP and the Coalition have abandoned those voters that care about the environment. And we saw on Tuesday in estimates that there's now no difference between the ALP and Tony Abbott's Coalition on environment policy. So just like refugee policy, just like same-sex marriage, just like support for single parents, there is now no difference between Labor and the Coalition on the environment. And I think people will know that, and of course they'll know to come to the Greens. With this campaign, we want to give those people a voice and let every ordinary Australian say, this place or this species, this is what's too precious to lose for me. So we'll show you in a moment an interactive website that we're launching today to allow community members to do that and to share their love of the icons that they hold so dear. For me, of course, it's the Great Barrier Reef, and I was really fortunate at a young age to go on a turtle counting expedition with my dad in one of those deserted reef islands about 10 hours off the coast. Tiny little island, only takes about an hour to walk around, and I got to see green turtles laying, and another year I got to see them hatching. And that stays with me, and that's what drives me in the fight to stop this beautiful place being turned into a highway for shipping, being dredged beyond belief for new ports, and having that spoil dumped right back onto it that will smother those corals. I wanted to just play you a short video to show you what's at stake with the reef, and hopefully it will work. Well, as you can see, we've got so much in this beautiful country that's just too precious to lose. And so on that note, we're going to show you something else that's too precious to lose, which is the Tarkine, and then we're going to show you our interactive website to help the community share with all of us the places that they think are too precious to lose.
Well, one of the ways that we're going to engage Australians around the country is through the website. We've identified a number of places that we think are too precious to lose, that are really part of the national psyche, part of our identification with the nation, but we know right around the country, community groups, local people have got very special places that mean so much for them and define their sense of place. And so we are inviting the community to come and to join us on the website and identify the places that they think are too precious to lose in their local context. And so I invite Senator Scott Ludlam to come up and give us a bit of a run through of the website. Thanks, Scott.
All right, this is the first time that we've tried this, so...
Every confidence.
Let's see, where's the map, folks?
Even more
Here we go. All right, so folks, the web address that you saw pop up at the end of the video before, of the Great Barrier Reef video, and the one that's on all the gorgeous materials that have been produced, will take you here to this web page, which, as you can see, has the icons that we have been speaking of. But actually, the assault on Australia's environment and places that are precious to us all is occurring at all scales, right across many, many communities, in addition to these that we've posted today. So this is going to be a collaborative effort. And the team have put together a really impressive little package, which effectively will allow you to add your place of an existing campaign or a campaign that you'd like to start. This is going to work very well for friends of groups and existing campaign groups, but also community groups that want to get a campaign started and literally to put it on the map. Now, a place that holds great significance for me, so I'll just zoom in and show you exactly how easy this is to do. Is the Belia wetlands in the southern part of the Perth metropolitan area, where the state government proposes to drive 4 or 6 lanes of tarmac through a really important wetland and heritage area. So you can see using Google Maps that you can go all the way down to the street level, and there's my little wetland chain there. It's kind of nice being able to talk about Belia to a national audience. So the reserve, that right there is where the freeway is proposed to blast through. I think that is a terrible waste of $600 million, and I think that place is too precious to lose. So having popped that pin on the map, you just now fill out some basic information, name, contact details, tell us more about your place. If there's an existing campaign website, it'll link directly to there, and it will also link live to a Flickr image gallery. So you can see very rapidly the kind of materials that we've been able to prepare for the campaigns that we've collectively been working on for decades can be added now at a very fine grain level for campaigns right around the country. I think, as Christine and Larissa have identified, we cannot afford to take environmental legislation back 30 years, particularly when the stress and the assault on the environment is as acute as it is now. So I really look forward to seeing this campaign tool take its place so that we can all identify and help protect the places that are too precious to lose. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Scott, and I really look forward to the engagement that we'll have with the community, and I think both the government and the coalition are going to be shocked when they start seeing how many Australians really value the environment and recognise that it is being liquidated at an alarming rate simply to facilitate so-called productivity gains. And it's going to get worse because as commodity prices fall, the only way companies stay profitable is to increase the volume and the speed at which they extract the minerals, the gas and so on, and the result will be even more temptation for state governments to waive environmental protection, to fast-track major developments and ignore environmental protections that have been long established and hard fought by communities. So it's a really great campaign. It's going to get all my Green colleagues in the federal parliament and working with state parliament Greens as well and local Greens councillors working to actually go back and say it's time we protect the environment that underpins the life that we all have, because if we lose our environment then we lose the basis of supporting our ecosystems and our lifestyles, and it's about survival in the long term. And with climate change accelerating this century, what we need to do is be protecting natural ecosystems to build in resilience in those systems so to give them their best chance of survival, not actually exacerbate climate change by putting greater pressure on places that are having such difficulty maintaining their integrity. I wanted to just indicate quickly that all my Senate colleagues and Adam in the House will be working on these. So just to go around the country, basically in New South Wales, Lee will be working on National Park and of course koala habitat. We've also got in Victoria, Richard will be working on the leadbeater's possum and of course the logging, saving those forests as habitat, as will Adam in South Australia. Penny's working on Kangaroo Island and Sarah of course on the Coorong, the Lower Lakes and the mouth of the Murray. Scott will be working on Kakadu and on the Burrup Peninsula. And of course Rachel on the Kimberley, Larissa on the Great Barrier Reef and Peter and I on the Tarkine in Tasmania. And we'll be joining with local activist groups as we support other places and other habitats around the country. So I'm looking forward to joining with the rest of Australia in saying to the Prime Minister, to the resource extractive industries, to the Coalition, to the Business Council of Australia and all their associates, these places are too precious to lose, and we are going to campaign to make sure that they are not liquidated in the pursuit of a quick dollar. Thanks very much. We'll take some questions.
What's your message to Aboriginal people who want to develop their country and see it fit to do that? And also a question for Larissa maybe about wild rivers. Is that something you'll see pop up on this website, for example?
Okay, I might just hand over to Rachel Seward to make a comment on Indigenous communities and liaison, especially I was up in the Kimberley recently with regard to James Price Point and met with a number of people in the community there, both for and against the gas hub. But I can say that overwhelmingly the traditional owners do not want that development. But Rachel, you might wish to speak in a more general sense, and then Larissa specifically on the Cape. Wild rivers.
Christine's right. I'm sorry.
Come up here, Rach.
Sorry, Christine's right. I've spent a lot of time in the Kimberley and a lot of time talking to traditional owners and custodians. The overwhelming support for the campaign from the custodians to protect James Price Point is very important. I will note there too, our position has always been that we're not opposing the extraction of gas, that proposal per se. It's where they want to bring it on shore, and we've always maintained the position that any benefits that come from that extraction of the gas must flow to the custodians and the traditional owners in the Kimberley. In terms of the wider issue around the environment, one of the things that is really taking off in particular remoter parts of Australia is the protection of the environment, and not only the protection but the custodianship, the maintenance of the large areas of Australia are now owned and managed by Aboriginal communities. And the more that we can invest in supporting Aboriginal communities in for example, as Indigenous protected areas and Indigenous ranges, we're finding a lot of take-up. In fact, there's more uptake of it than there's funding for, and we need to increase the funding because it provides not only some economic basis, but it also maintains contact and culture. So we're very cognizant of that issue when we're talking about protection of the environment.
Oh, I might just answer on wild rivers. Sorry to butt in there, Marcus. Look, thanks for your question.
Yeah, you're talking about the transfer of power to states, and I know that you've been talking about wild rivers a lot, and Campbell Newman's he is delivering a lot of what he's said prior to the election in terms of job cuts and these biodiversity regional management zones as well when it comes to Cape York.
Yeah, look, you're right. Campbell Newman is slashing and burning most of the environmental protection laws that we have in Queensland. I'm sure he intends to trash what's left as well. Wild rivers is one of the first pieces of legislation that's going to go. He's replacing that on the Cape with some morphing process, which currently sounds like it's not going to be able to prohibit mining. Despite the fact that many of the traditional owner groups on the Cape, as you know, want their rivers protected. And they want the sustainable economic opportunities that healthy country has. So I think it's all the more important that the Federal Environment Minister doesn't completely vacate his job and give those responsibilities to Campbell Newman, because look what we're seeing already, and that's what we'll see around the country if we leave it up to the states. They will simply trash the joint for a quick buck, against the wishes of traditional owners, against the wishes of the community, and the federal government won't be able to do anything to stop them. This is the biggest thing we've seen in environmental law in 30 years, and we're throwing everything at this to make the government change its mind.
Marcus, sorry.
You say that the states can't be trusted with the environment, but if there was a change of government, why would you trust Tony Abbott any more than the states?
Well, in a general principle, Larissa wants to make a specific comment in a moment, but as a general principle, to at least have the federal government oversee what state governments are doing, and having the backup that a review and a greater capacity at the federal level under environmental law at least gives us the capacity to review things. If you go with what is currently proposed, we're going to have a framework which is best exemplified by the regional forest agreements. That is the kind of framework that is being proposed, whereby it is an accredited process and then the states oversee it. And if you look at what's happened under regional forest agreements, you've seen the destruction of forests at the fastest rate, huge loss of biodiversity, incredibly economic disaster for the states involved. It has been a monumental disaster, and that's what you would be getting. But at least if you maintain federal oversight under the law, whilst Tony Abbott may not wish to protect areas, at least the law is there as something that you can work with. Larissa, do you want to comment?
Yeah, look, I might just add a bit to that, Marcus. As you know, most of our state laws are designed to facilitate development, and our federal environmental laws at least have the purpose of protecting the environment. Now, we think they're already too weak, but the fact that they're too weak isn't an excuse to get rid of them entirely. They should be strengthened rather than weakened. And these standards that the department are currently drafted to enable the handoff of all of these powers, look, the states have shown that they're not going to meet standards. They've shown that it's development at all costs. So we can't have any confidence that they will comply with these standards. They'll find a way to flout them. But I think most importantly, these are icons that all Australians hold dear. This is all of our natural environment. I'm a Queenslander, but I love the Tarkine, I love the Kimberley. And I think you'll find that all Australians share that love and concern for the state of Australia's environment. They want to know that our federal government is doing its job to protect our national environment. I think it's as simple as that.
But don't you concede that there are problems with the current framework where you have two regulatory regimes side by side, yet not operating concurrently? In addition, you have federal oversight being extended to areas like Bondi, creating real problems in development and planning.
Look, as you know, the Constitution divvies up responsibility for the environment, and so we have a complex system, I agree, but we don't have a lot of duplication. There's already been a process whereby those environmental assessments are accredited. So it's not like developers have to prepare two sets of documentations. They've already addressed that issue several years ago. There's only one set of documents that get prepared. They simply go to the two levels of government and each apply their different criteria. So I take issue with the contention that there's duplication and the contention that environmental laws are slowing down development. There's yet to be independent government proof of that. Sure, industry claims that, of course. They want to fast-track everything as quickly as possible. But we haven't yet seen independent evidence that there is in fact either duplication or a slowing down effect. And I think it's important that we have laws that protect these places. And I think community members expect that the federal government will do its job to protect the environment in the interests of all Australians. These are all of our icons. They're not just state government's purview to do with what they will and sacrifice to industry.
Any other questions?
Yeah, could you just maybe give us a kind of a case study with the Tarkine or perhaps James Price Point as to how the process would be demonstrably different under the EPBC Act reforms that are being talked about as opposed to the current?
Okay. We might just do James Price Point.
Maybe they're handing off heritage.
Okay, James Price Point is a really good example. If you look at the environmental impact assessment that Woodside has done, they claim they've spent $80 million and that it's a good quality assessment. Murdoch University has done an assessment of just the marine side of it. They've highlighted the poor counts in terms of the whales. They've highlighted the fact that they didn't find the miniature spinnaker dolphin. They've highlighted the fact that they didn't do the dugong counts appropriately. They've highlighted the fact that the dolphins, the way they addressed the dolphins in terms of they said, oh, well, the dolphins will demonstrate a flight mechanism to get away from the ships in the area. Now, any first-year marine biologists knows for a start that can have a significant impact on breeding, and on feeding cycles and things like that for dolphins. So in other words, the point I'm making there is that the assessment was very poor and you can't rely, and the state EPA, remember the state EPA, in WA we couldn't get 5 independent people to assess James Price Point. So it came down to one, the chair made the decision and made the call. We don't think that's appropriate. And that the call was, yes, this is okay, put some conditions on which we all know that aren't monitored properly. They put conditions on that did not address the fundamentally poor nature of the environmental impact assessment. Now, in this case, under the law as it stands at the moment, we've got redress back to the Commonwealth Government to say there are you can't address, even though under the law you can't address all the things that are wrong because not all of them are national triggers, you can address major things like whales, like the threatened species that are there. They haven't addressed at all the social impact assessment process. That the Kimberley Land Council has pointed out many problems with the social impact assessment process, and the heritage side of things have the WA government is busy changing the laws so they don't have to comply with their existing West Australian laws, let alone addressing the federal laws. They downplayed the very, very important dinosaur trackways. They haven't properly addressed the recent discoveries there. So there's absolutely fundamental flaws in that assessment that if we didn't have the Commonwealth overviewing it, they would tick it off and let it go through when there are major national and international environmental heritage and cultural issues involved there.
In fairness to Tony Burke, though, isn't he talking about retaining some kind of Commonwealth oversight of the process under the reforms?
Yeah, look, I might speak if it's a process question. It's so nice to get a process question. Thank you, David. So as you know, the intention as agreed at COAG with the big business love-in that they had the day before and then COAG the following day was that the federal government will draft standards, and as long as these states meet the standards, the feds won't have anything to do with approving massive new mines in World Heritage areas, huge gas hubs in important marine sanctuaries right next to heritage areas on the land. So the nub of the government's argument comes down to this whole, oh, the standards will protect everything. Well, I'm afraid you just have to look at the record of the states in their treatment of the environment generally and in their ability to comply with existing standards. Rachel's given you lots of examples of how they've flouted those standards. Another recent example is the debacle at Alpha coal mine, the biggest coal mine in the southern hemisphere, which both the state and federal government just ticked off on. The states didn't do their environmental impact statement properly and they ticked off on it anyway. The federal government had to say, oh, hang on, no, that doesn't meet our standards, we'll take it off you. So I'm afraid there can be no confidence that the states will comply with these standards. is it in essence. They'll find a way to get around them. They'll find loopholes or they'll simply flout them like they did at Alpha. And as I said, these are national environmental icons. We need our national government involved here. It's not appropriate. These are internationally significant places that we have international obligations to look after, that our community expects us to look after. It's not something that should simply be left to the whims of state governments.
Thanks, Teresa. Oh, sorry, ma'am.
Will you be running TV advertising on this, and if so, who's paying? And finally, how important is this as a national campaign to the Greens in the lead up to the next election?
So to the issue of advertising to start with, we will certainly be out fundraising to try to raise the money to be able to lift the profile of the campaign around the country and inform the community exactly what the Prime Minister, with the support of Tony Abbott, is trying to do to the environment. So we will be certainly amongst the Greens around the country. This will be a major fundraising opportunity for us to try and put the message out there in the best ways we can, and advertising will certainly be considered depending on how much we can raise. In the longer term, we will be campaigning on this right up until the next election. We've made it very clear that we do not support what the Prime Minister is doing and what Tony Abbott would do as well in terms of taking away federal responsibility for environmental protection, and we will be campaigning very hard on it. Because as I said at the Press Club, there are only two things in the world, two real things in the world, and that's people and nature. And we have an economic system which is currently undermining any kind of sustainable relationship between people and nature. We have an economic system which is driving destruction of nature and undermining people in the long term in doing that. The Greens think about things in 100 years' time. This is a campaign not only about now, but it's about intergenerational equity. This is saying, do we want our children and grandchildren be able to go and enjoy the Great Barrier Reef or the Tarkine? And if we do, then we've got an obligation to step in now and do something about it, because these things, creatures do go to extinction. Places do get lost. We've had a report recently on the Great Barrier Reef showing that the coral cover has halved. We know that in part that's because of global warming. Hence, what we have to do is build resilience, increase the protection of the reef because of the absolute assault that's come into the reef because of ocean acidification, of warming and bleaching, but of course the destruction now with dredging and dumping of fill and also the runoff from agricultural land is just making that worse. So we're thinking about this generation, next generation and the generation after, and we're saying to people, extinction is forever. It's possible these places can be lost. And people need to think about that. And in the Tasmanian context of the Tarkine, the Tasmanian devil is going to extinction. The Tarkine is the last remnant of area where we have disease-free devils. And we have the Tasmanian Premier flying to Canberra to beg the federal government not to protect the area. Extraordinary. So if anyone wanted any proof that handing over control of the Tarkine to the states would mean it's going to be destroyed, just look at the statements from the Tasmanian Premier and backed up by the unions, by Paul Howes, and they do not want the area listed, protected, either as cultural or natural heritage. That's what we're up against, but the Greens are confident that we can campaign, that we can work with people around the country to say Australia is not up for grabs and to be destroyed for a quick dollar. We want to protect all those things that we love about this country that are too precious to lose. Thanks very much.